Unimpau Radio. Música, variedad y noticias. Unimpau Radio, la radio virtual de la Fundación Universitaria Impau.
Sé lo que quiero. En 5 años me voy a ganar mi primer premio Simón Bolívar. Por eso decidí estudiar Comunicación Social y Periodismo en la Universidad Unimpau.
Estudia en la Universidad Unimpau, la primera escuela tecnológica en periodismo de América Latina. Llámanos al 332-3500. Con Unimpau lo puedes lograr.
Institución de Educación Superior sujeta a inspección y vigilancia por el Ministerio de Educación Nacional.
Unimpau Fundacional, 10 carreras tecnológicas y 3 carreras universitarias. Ingresa unimpau.edu.co o en Twitter @Unimpau o llama a la línea 332-3500. Unimpau, 40 años formando profesionales.
De cara al mundo. Entrevistas, trivias, notas, datos curiosos, experiencias, cultura y mucho más. Solo en De cara al mundo. Escúchanos a través de Unimpau Radio cada 15 días, los miércoles de 3 a 4 de la tarde.
En Unimpau Radio, vive la felicidad.
Vive la felicidad.
Un programa motivacional para la promoción y aplicación de la felicidad en el ámbito laboral. Escúchanos todos los jueves a las 10 de la mañana a través de Unimpau Radio. Conduce Estefanía Ruiz y Javier Moreno. Vive la felicidad.
Escuchas. Unimpau Radio. 88.3 FM.
From Bogota, this is Dispatch Colombia. I'm Desmond Bastide with the latest news and views from across the country for audiences around the world.
Dispatch Colombia.
You're listening to Dispatch Colombia. Hello and welcome to another episode of Dispatch Colombia. I'm Desmond Bastide, glad you could join us. Today, 2 weeks after the death of Colombian journalist Efigenia Vázquez, we ask why the country still has such an appalling record on press freedom. 31-year-old Efigenia Vázquez, who was a reporter and presenter with community radio Renacer, sustained the fatal gunshot injuries while covering a Colombian riot police operation to evict members of an indigenous community occupying disputed land in Puracé in the southwestern department of Cauca. She died of her injuries a few hours later the same day after being taken to San Jose Hospital in the nearby city of Popayán. 2 protesters were also injured in the clashes with the riot police. In a separate incident on October the 8th, police fired rubber bullets and tear gas at an international delegation of UN representatives, members of human rights NGOs, politicians and journalists in a rural area of Tumaco in the neighbouring department of Nariño. The delegation had gone there to investigate the deaths of 6 farm workers in clashes with police on the 5th of October. UNESCO and Reporters Without Borders have the killing and demanded answers. To discuss this further, Reporters Without Borders Latin American Director Emmanuel Colombier joins us on the line from Brazil. Emmanuel Colombier, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Hi everyone. Thanks for receiving me.
So, Colombia is ranked 129th out of 180 countries on RSF's 2017 World Press Freedom Index, and behind Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe. Now, the tragic death of Efigenia Vázquez 2 weeks ago will do nothing to improve this, will it?
Indeed, it's the first murder of journalists in Colombia so far this year. In 2016, there was no journalist killed with a direct relation with their work. So yes, murders of journalists are not the only information and indications that allows us to produce this classification, this index. But indeed, yes, it's very preoccupying, and it won't help Colombia to position for next year's index, obviously. So we are quite preoccupied, and something even more preoccupying is impunity in the country. And since the death of Efigenia, we don't have any information around the investigations. We don't know anything. There is no public information on who is responsible for death. So this is, I think, a big problem in the country, and in the place where Efigenia was killed in Cauca. Working as a journalist is very complicated, and it's one of the most dangerous region for journalists in Colombia.
Okay, so let's go into the details a bit. UNESCO, as I mentioned, along with yourselves, Reporters Without Borders, have condemned the killing and demanded answers. You say that answers are not coming forward so far. We do know that the riot police were at the scene to deal with an issue regarding land and indigenous peoples in that area.
Yes, indeed. From the information we've got,
I should say as well, the anti-riot police in Colombia, I mean, they're an intimidating force, certainly to look at. I've seen them on the streets of Bogota, and they're not to be messed with, that's for sure, in the physical stature of them in itself.
Yes, of course. But as you already know, there are a lot of social conflicts in Colombia. Most of them are related to. So we don't have the proof so far that the shot came from this special police. But all the indication we've got goes in that direction. So we are waiting to have a public information and declaration from national authorities, but also from the Cauca authorities around these killings, because we don't know anything. We don't have any official information around this. We are urging the authorities to communicate around that, by respect for her, for her family, and for the other journalists in the region.
Now, you said the authorities are not releasing information, or it's very difficult to come across. Do you think that is because the national government and the government of Cauca are reluctant to divulge that information to you, or do you think that it's just a case where the investigation is still at such an early stage that we can't find out that information?
It seems obvious that a member of this police were at the origin of the shooting. So I think they are trying to gain time, and if we don't put pressure on them, maybe get out from the investigation. So this is why we try to do without Reporters Without Borders and other organizations, to ask for justice around this case, because as I told you, impunity is one of the main issues around freedom of the press in the country. So if the responsible for this crime aren't identified and punished, well, the situation will keep going on this way. So yes, impunity is of the journalists in the country, so it's very important for them to communicate around the investigation.
We'll go into the issue of impunity just a little bit later, but before we move on to that, I just want to focus on Efigenia Vázquez. She was a reporter and presenter with the community radio Renacer. Was she known to authorities, and did she have difficulty in the area before the incident? Do we know anything about that?
She, as all the journalists that try to cover social conflicts in the region, she had some difficulties, but we don't know of previous threats that she could have received. What we know is when she was shot, she was clearly a journalist. She was working as a journalist. She was a member of the protesters that were asking for justice in some property case, land property case. So she was clearly shot because she was covering what was happening there. So this is the information we've got. On the rest, unfortunately, we miss information around that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And do we think that there's no chance that this was friendly fire, if you like, for want of another word, and she happened to get caught up in the middle of it?
This is what we want to know. We want to know if she received the shot because she was at the wrong place at the wrong moment, or if she was clearly identified as a target by the police, which would be obviously dramatic and very, very grave. But this is the information we are trying to get, and this is the responsibility of the local authorities to know what motivated the shooting, because as you told, some other members of the protesters were injured during the shooting. So we don't know for now if Iphigenia was identified and identified as a target for being a journalist, or if she just was, as I told you, at the wrong place and at the wrong moment.
This comes at Manuel Santos has said that he wants to improve the situation for the freedom of the press in Colombia. But this incident, the death of Iphigenia Vázquez, happened on the same week as an incident in Popayán where 6 farmers were actually shot dead by police in Popayán. And it turns out that only a number of days afterwards, when a number of NGOs and the UN went to investigate, that there was another incident there as well.
Yes, there was a series of incidents recently. The incident you told about wasn't involving journalists, so I as a representative of Reporters Without Borders, I will just talk around journalists. Mm-hmm. But yes, the problem is the covering of this conflict is very difficult for the journalists, and it is indeed a sensitive period for Colombia. As you told, the signing of historic peace agreements last year, even if it dispelled a great deal of tensions, we don't know for now what's going to be the application of the peace agreements, and the peace agreements have an important chapter around, for example, community medias and local radios, and the government wants to give more frequencies and access to technologies to do journalism. And so we are following the situation from very close. We did salute the peace agreements. We think that it put an end to a period of tensions and a period of high danger for journalists, but we don't know for sure that the agreement will be implemented in great conditions. So yeah, we think that Colombia can become not a model, but a country where the work of journalists can be an example, considering the very violent neighbors of Colombia. I'm thinking around about Central America and Mexico,
and Venezuela, I suppose, at the moment. But we'll go into that in just a few moments. If we just take a quick break, we'll be back with Emmanuel Colombia, and we'll discuss more about the freedom of press here in Colombia. You're listening to Dispatch Colombia.
Escuchas Unimpau Radio 88.3 FM.
Sé lo que quiero. En 5 años me voy a ganar mi primer premio Simón Bolívar. Por eso decidí estudiar comunicación social y periodismo en la Universidad Unimpao.
Estudia en la Universidad Unimpao, la primera escuela tecnológica en periodismo de América Latina. Llámanos al 332-3500. Con Unimpao lo puedes lograr.
Institución de Educación Superior sujeta a inspección y vigilancia por el Ministerio de Educación Nacional.
De cara al mundo. Entrevistas, trivias, notas, datos curiosos, experiencias, cultura y mucho más. Solo en De cara al mundo. Escúchanos a través de Unimpau Radio cada 15 días, los miércoles de 3 a 4 de la tarde.
Oye, ¿y esos pitos? Los del son de la 39. ¿Cómo así? Sí, señor. El espacio musical con la mejor salsa de todos los tiempos. Salsa de calidad.
Pero ¿y eso qué?
Hola amigos de Unimpau, soy Vicente Moros Ortega, el que a la salsa sí le pega, y los invito a escuchar El Son de la 39 con Neider, con Sebastián y todo su equipo de trabajo. Sigan disfrutando de la buena salsa aquí, en este su espacio favorito.
Si lo dice él,
póngale la firma.
This is Dispatch Colombia. Join Desmond Bastide every Tuesday at 10 a.m. on Impau Radio with the latest news and views from across the country for audiences around the world.
Dispatch Colombia por Unimpau Radio.
En Unimpau Radio, vive la felicidad.
Vive la felicidad.
Un programa motivacional para la promoción y aplicación de la felicidad en el ámbito laboral. Escúchanos todos los jueves a las 10 de la mañana a través de Unimpau Radio. Conduce Estefanía Ruiz y Javier Moreno. Vive la felicidad.
El mundo tiene alrededor de 7.000 millones de habitantes. 3.200 millones de personas tienen acceso a Internet, lo cual equivale al 40% de la población mundial. 2.000 millones utilizan redes móviles para navegar y 35 de cada 100 habitantes tienen una conexión de más de 5 megas de velocidad. Si estás aquí es porque haces parte de esta población y la web es tu mejor compañía. Por eso, no te desconectes. Conectes. Unimpau Radio tiene para ti un programa que te mantendrá sincronizado con lo que pasa en la web y el mundo de la tecnología. Sky 3. Todos los viernes de 5 a 7 p.m. hora Colombia. Conduce Juan David Oyuela. Unimpau Fundación Universitaria te ofrece un programa técnico profesional, 10 carreras tecnológicas y 3 carreras universitarias. Ingresa unimpau.edu.co o en Twitter @Unimpau o llama a la línea 332-3500. Unimpau, 40 años formando profesionales.
Escuchas. Unimpau Radio. 88.3 FM.
Estás escuchando Dispatch Colombia por Unimpau Radio. Hello and welcome back to Dispatch Colombia, where we're joined by the Reporters Without Borders Latin America Director Emmanuel Colombia. We're discussing the death of a journalist in Colombia, Efigenia Vasquez, who was shot dead 2 weeks ago. She was reporting on a incident in the south of the country, and there has been no details yet as to how her death had been caused. There was a situation where riot police were attending a incident or a protest between indigenous peoples and some landowners, and there has been no further details at this point. Emmanuel, we've been discussing Colombia's difficulty with press freedom, but impunity seems to be the main cause for a lot of these incidents. What do you think, in your opinion, is behind the issue of impunity and why it's been such an ongoing issue for the press in Colombia?
Well, I think impunity has to do directly with violence in the country, and obviously with corruption, which is not only visible in Colombia but in most Latin America countries. But yes, talking about violence in Colombia, journalists continue to be threatened by the Bacrims, the gangs of former paramilitaries that are now involved in drug trafficking, for example. So we still have cases of physical attacks, death threats, and murders, as the one of Iphigenia are still common. So yes, Colombia keeps being one of the most dangerous countries for the media in the region, and criminal groups use violence to silence alternative or community media outlets that try to cover their activities. So yes, violence is still very present in the country. And the problem is that when we have cases of murders, for example, but in other cases of violence, justice doesn't do what she should do and doesn't investigate properly the cases because of the corruption and because of the fact that sometimes the aggressions directly come from representatives of the state, be it the police or some politicians. So obviously, if these people are at the origin of the threats and of the violence, they don't want to be investigated. So justice is very under influence of the politicians that are corrupted and of the organized crime. So this impunity, as I told you, generates a vicious cycle, and generates obviously censorship and self-censorship, which is a very big threat to freedom of the press, obviously, because if journalists know for sure that violence and crimes against journalists are unpunished, well, they will silence themselves and stop talking about topics that are putting in danger some political, economical, and organized crime interests.
Obviously, we don't know the details of Efigenia Vázquez's death yet, but we know she was shot, and there is a suggestion that it may be that it was Colombia's police that caused that death. You suggested that sometimes it's the paramilitaries are a threat to journalists, but in this case, would it be purely embarrassment that would be stopping the authorities from divulging what happened if it was a case that it was the riot police that...
It's hard to say, Desmond, because as I told you, we don't get any public information around that. So as I told you, we have elements and information from the colleagues of Iphigenia that say that it was she was shot by this special police, but I can't affirm from now that it was done by the police. But if it's the case, we want justice for Iphigenia. We want justice for Colombian journalists. So justice has to do what she should do in the country. This is fundamental. And so we miss element and proofs that she was indeed shot by the police, but it really looks like it,
Okay, so. Okay, and so finally, you carried out an interview very recently with President Juan Manuel Santos, and he said that he wanted Colombia to move up these rankings, 129th, as I mentioned, this year, behind Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe. So not a pretty position to be in. What did the president have to say to you, and did you get the impression that this incident with Efigenia aside, that there was
used to be a journalist. His family owns a big newspaper. He knows
El Tiempo,
the work of journalists. He knows around what's freedom of the press. He knows that freedom of the press is very important in democracy. So it was like an interesting talk. He committed himself to improve the situation in the country because in some regions, he knows about that. Working as a journalist is very complicated. In the capital of Bogota, the security situation is satisfactory, but in poorest region, journalists continue to be exposed to terrible threats in many parts of the country. So he knows that it's very important to reinforce the mechanism of protection of journalists. He knows that justice have to get better resources to investigate crimes such as the Iphigenia's crime, but any kind of aggression and persecution of journalists has to be better investigated by justice, even if he recognizes that justice has to work independently. He knows that there are still a lot of work ahead for Colombia to improve the situation. I'm not just talking around the index of Reporters Without Borders, but the global situation for journalists, and is very conscious of all that.
He wanted to highlight the fact that Colombia is fourth in the OECD's 2017 Open Data Ranking. How much of an impact does that have on a country's ranking on your press freedom index?
Well, our index measures indicators such as independence of the media, level of concentration of the media.
This would go into the fact that El Tiempo, as you said, Mr. Santos was a director of El Tiempo, and he's now president of the country. Does this factor into your index that power and the media are very closely related?
No, I wasn't suggesting it. I think that President Santos does respect the editorial independence that the media need. I don't think the media work independently without any threat. So his position was quite clear, and he doesn't want to. He doesn't want private interests, be it political, economical, or religious interest to interfere in the editorial lines of the media. So this is a good point. But as I told you, the main issue is Colombia. Even if there is a big level of concentration, the main issue are reinforcing the mechanism of protection and fighting impunity of the crimes against journalists. So on this part, he was quite concerned and committed to improve the situation. So we have the hope that in Colombia the whole the level of freedom of the press will rise in the coming years.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there. We'll keep an eye on this story. Very much appreciate your time, Emmanuel Colombier. He is the director of the Latin American side of Reporters Without Borders, and reporting on that death of Iphigenia Vázquez, the journalist who was killed on the 8th of October. Emmanuel Colombier, thank you very much for joining us on Dispatch Colombia this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thanks for talking about freedom of the press.
And if you have any stories you'd like us to cover on Dispatch Colombia, you can get in touch at Gmail, dispatchcolombia@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at Dispatch Colombia. Thanks for joining us again on Dispatch Colombia, and hope you will talk to you again soon. From Bogota, this is Dispatch Colombia. From Bogota, this is Dispatch Colombia. Join the Dispatch Colombia discussion on Twitter at Dispatch Colombia, or email us at dispatchcolombia@gmail.com, and join us again next time.
Transmite desde Colombia y para el mundo entero. Unimpau Radio. Unimpau Radio. Escúchanos. www.impau.tv y en frecuencia modulada 88.3 FM. Unimpau Radio. Música, variedad y noticias. Unimpau Radio, la radio virtual.